It was just another bright, sunny afternoon when it all started. The sound of roaring engines filled the air as riders zoomed down the highway, their motorcycles weaving through the lanes, a brotherhood of speed and freedom. Among them was a man, dressed in black leather, his bike gleaming like a steel beast against the sunlight. He wasn't just any rider. He was Michael, a black biker with years of experience on the road, a man who had always prided himself on his quiet confidence and deep love for the freedom biking brought him. But on this day, Michael's journey would take an unexpected turn, one that would test his character in ways he never imagined. As he approached a stop at a small-town gas station, he noticed a group of riders gathered near the pumps, laughing and joking around. At first, he paid them no mind. Riders are often a tight-knit crowd, and it was nothing new to see people casually talking and sharing stories. However, something felt off about this group. Michael couldn't put his finger on it, but the air was tense, like there was an underlying hostility brewing. As Michael stepped off his bike and began to fill up his tank, he noticed their eyes on him. The group, mostly white men dressed in leather vests, stared with an unsettling intensity. Michael kept his head down, focusing on the task at hand, but he could feel the tension rising. Then one of the men, a burly figure with tattoos running down his arms, stepped forward. He was tall, his posture arrogant, as if he were daring Michael to make the first move. "Nice bike, brother. But I gotta say, it's a shame to see someone like you on something like that." The man sneered, his words dripping with a kind of thinly veiled hostility. Michael's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't the first time he'd encountered racism on the road, but it still stung. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He'd dealt with this before, on the road, in life. It was always the same. People who thought they could intimidate him because of the color of his skin. But Michael was no stranger to standing his ground. He wasn't going to let some stranger talk down to him, especially not in his element. He turned to face the man, his calm demeanor belying the storm brewing inside. "What do you mean by that?" Michael asked, his voice steady but firm. The group around them chuckled, as if the situation were some kind of joke. The burly man smirked, crossing his arms over his chest. "You know exactly what I mean. You don't belong here, riding with us. People like you should stay in their own lane." The word stung, but Michael didn't flinch. He had been in situations like this before, and he knew that it wasn't just about the words. It was about respect and earning it, and Michael wasn't going to back down. "Is that so?" Michael asked, taking a step closer, his eyes locked onto the man's. "Well, let me tell you something. This road is for anyone who has the guts to ride it, and I'm not going anywhere." The burly man's grin faded, replaced by a look of irritation. The other riders in the group shifted uneasily, but none of them spoke up. Michael's calm resolve had thrown them off. He wasn't the kind of person they were used to seeing. Most people would have backed down by now. But not him. He stood tall, his presence commanding the space, even in the face of their insults. For a moment, there was silence, the only sound the hum of the gas pump and the distant growl of engines. The tension in the air was palpable. The burly man took a step forward, his face now contorted with anger. "You think you're tough, huh?" He spat, his voice low and menacing. "You think you can just walk in here and act like you're one of us?" Michael didn't flinch. "I don't have to act like anything. I am one of you." But the group wasn't done yet. They had their own agenda, their own set of rules. This wasn't just about the bike. This was about power, intimidation, and control. And they weren't about to let someone like Michael take that from them. The situation was escalating. The other riders were beginning to circle around Michael, their body language aggressive, like wolves closing in on their prey. But Michael stood his ground, his eyes unwavering, his hands steady by his sides. This wasn't just about a confrontation at a gas station. This was about something bigger, something deeper. It was about the system of fear and intimidation that people like him had to deal with every day, and whether or not he was going to let it control him. As the confrontation continued, Michael knew that this moment wasn't just about winning a fight. It was about sending a message. Not just to these men, but to anyone who would dare try to put him in a box because of the color of his skin. It was about standing up for what was right, no matter the cost. But just as the situation seemed ready to explode, a sudden voice cut through the tension. "You really want to do this right now?" The voice belonged to another rider, a woman who had pulled up on her own bike, her helmet still in her hand. She wasn't part of the group, but she had seen what was happening, and she wasn't about to stand by and let it go down. Her question hung in the air like a challenge. The group looked at her, momentarily distracted, as if they hadn't expected anyone to interfere. The woman stepped forward, her stance protective, as if she were ready to back Michael up. Michael didn't know who she was or what her intentions were, but in that moment, he saw something he hadn't seen in a long time. A glimmer of solidarity, of someone standing up for what was right. But just as the tension reached its peak, with the group on the brink of violence, something unexpected happened. The burly man, his fists clenched, looked at the woman, then back at Michael. His eyes narrowed, and for a brief second, there was a flicker of doubt in his expression. Would he back down? Would he let his ego rule, or would he recognize the power of standing together, regardless of skin color, in the face of hate and fear? The answer wasn't clear. Not yet. The stage was set. The battle lines had been drawn. And Michael, despite everything, remained calm, unwavering. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for something bigger, something that might change everything. But as the tension built and the clock ticked down, one thing was certain. This was far from over. The story was just beginning. And what happened next would leave everyone questioning their assumptions, their beliefs, and the very essence of what it meant to be free. The tension in the air was thick, suffocating. Michael stood there, his mind racing, but his body was still, as if he were waiting for something, some kind of sign, some signal that would tell him what to do next. The burly man, who had been the source of all this trouble, was staring him down with narrowed eyes. The other bikers had stepped back, almost instinctively, unsure whether to support their friend or to retreat. And then there was the woman, stranger or ally. It wasn't clear yet, but her presence felt like a spark in the middle of a powder keg. The gas station, with its flickering lights and the dull hum of the pumps, suddenly felt too small, like the walls were closing in. Michael had dealt with racism his whole life, whether on the road, at work, or just going about his day. But this felt different. It wasn't just about some ignorant comment or subtle snub. This was a direct challenge to his right to be on the road, to share the same space, to live freely without judgment or hostility. It was a reminder of the kind of world he had always tried to avoid. A world where people like him had to constantly prove they belonged. Michael's gaze shifted between the burly man and the woman who had just arrived. She was still standing there, her posture unwavering, waiting for a response. She wasn't backing down, but he didn't know her. And in a world like theirs, that meant everything. Was she just trying to get involved, or was she truly someone who would have his back if things got ugly? He wasn't sure, but he knew he couldn't show any sign of weakness. Not now. He had always been the quiet type, the one who preferred to keep his head down, his focus on the road ahead. But there were moments in life when that didn't work anymore, when you had to stand up, even if it meant everything was on the line. This was one of those moments. The burly man shifted, his fists clenched tighter, knuckles white. He took a step forward, his eyes flicking to the woman, and then back to Michael. The air between them was electric now, charged with the possibility of violence. The woman was still standing firm, her eyes scanning the situation, calculating. Michael could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had to make a choice. Not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. He wasn't going to let these men dictate who he was. "I didn't ask for this," Michael said, his voice low but clear, a calm in the storm. "I'm just here to get gas, just like you. So why don't we all just walk away and forget this ever happened?" The burly man scoffed. "You think you can just talk your way out of this? You think I'm gonna let some guy like you talk to me like that?" His voice was rising now, full of rage. Michael felt the tension in his muscles tighten, but he didn't flinch. "No one's asking for a fight," he said, his gaze steady, meeting the man's aggression head-on. "But if it comes down to it, I'm not backing down." The woman stepped forward, her eyes narrowing, her voice cutting through the air. "We all deserve respect, no matter who we are. What you're doing is wrong. You're not just bullying him. You're bullying everyone who's ever felt like they don't belong." The burly man froze, his face reddening with anger. But something in the woman's words seemed to hit a nerve. He turned his head away for a brief moment, almost as if he were trying to decide whether to keep going or walk away. The silence hung between them, thick and uncomfortable. The other bikers, who had been watching silently, were beginning to look uneasy. Some exchanged glances, while others seemed to be waiting for the first one to act, waiting for someone to take control, to make a decision. The tension was suffocating, every second feeling like it could be the one when everything went off the rails. Michael felt his heart pounding in his chest, but he refused to show fear. This was about more than just a confrontation. This was about making a stand, showing that people like him weren't going to let racism or hatred define them. Not anymore. "Listen," Michael said, his voice cutting through the tension. "I'm not looking for trouble, but I'm not going to let you disrespect me either. Not now, not ever." For a long moment, the burly man didn't move. His fist remained clenched, his face red with fury. But Michael could see something shifting in his eyes. Doubt, hesitation, maybe even a flicker of shame. The man was at a crossroads. He could either walk away, acknowledge his mistake, or escalate it further, proving that hatred and prejudice were more powerful than respect and decency. The group of bikers stood frozen, waiting for their leader's move. The gas station seemed to hold its breath. The woman had backed off slightly, but remained vigilant, her eyes locked on the situation, watching every movement closely. And then the unexpected happened. The burly man, still glaring at Michael, turned his back and muttered something under his breath, too quiet for anyone to hear. He walked toward his bike, his body tense, his steps heavy. The other bikers followed suit, their movements hesitant, unsure of what to do. The moment stretched on, the sound of boots hitting the pavement the only noise breaking the silence. Michael didn't move. He couldn't. He didn't trust that this was over, not yet. Not until they were all gone. He watched as the group slowly mounted their bikes and started their engines, the sound of roaring motors filling the space around them. As they rode off into the distance, Michael felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. The tension in his body started to dissipate, but there was no feeling of victory. He knew this was just one moment in a much larger battle, one that would continue long after the dust had settled. The woman approached him then, her step steady, her eyes still sharp. "You did good," she said simply, her voice calm but full of understanding. "But don't expect them to back off for good. People like that don't change easily." Michael nodded, his gaze following the retreating bikes as they disappeared down the road. He knew she was right. This wasn't the end. It couldn't be. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about standing up for every person who had ever felt the sting of hatred or judgment, who had ever been told they didn't belong. As he climbed back onto his bike, he knew that the road ahead would be long and unpredictable. But for the first time in a while, he felt like maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for change. And that was something worth fighting for. As Michael revved his bike and pulled away from the gas station, a strange weight hung in the air, a mixture of relief and uncertainty. The road ahead was clear, but his mind kept replaying the events. He couldn't shake the feeling that the confrontation with the burly man and his group wasn't just an isolated incident. It felt like a warning. A test. A challenge not just to him, but to everything he believed in. He thought about the woman, the stranger who had shown up at the right moment. She hadn't been afraid to speak out, to challenge the group when it mattered most. But why had she been there? Was it coincidence, or did she know something he didn't? It was a question that lingered in his mind, but he didn't have the time to dwell on it. The ride ahead was long, and the highway stretched out before him like a blank canvas, calling him to keep moving, keep fighting, no matter the obstacles. As he cruised down the road, Michael allowed himself a brief moment of peace. The wind whipped through his hair, the hum of his bike beneath him, the sense of freedom he had always loved. It was moments like these that reminded him why he rode, to escape the hate, the prejudice, and the anger. But even in that peace, he couldn't ignore the larger truth. The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. And then, just as he reached a quiet stretch of road, his phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. Surprised, he pulled over and checked the message. It was from an unknown number. His heart skipped when he saw the message. "We're not done with you. You may have won today, but you'll regret it. We'll be seeing you again." The message hit him like a punch to the gut. His mind raced as he tried to make sense of it. Who was it? The group from the gas station? Or was it someone else entirely? The threat was real, and Michael knew it wasn't just a bluff. He couldn't outrun this kind of hate, not forever. He had stood up for himself, but the battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. He couldn't let fear control him, though. He had already faced one storm today, and he knew there would be more ahead. The road, his bike, his love for the ride, it was what kept him going. But now it had to be more than that. It had to stand for something bigger. It had to be a statement, a message that people like him weren't going to let hate win. As Michael continued his ride, the sky darkened, clouds gathering in the distance like a storm that had yet to hit. The winding road stretched out before him, and he knew the journey ahead would be fraught with challenges. But he also knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let this world, with all its prejudice and hate, break him. As the miles passed, he thought back to the woman, the one who had stood beside him in the face of hostility. She had left just as quickly as she arrived, but her words still echoed in his mind. People like that don't change easily. She was right, but he also knew that change wasn't about them. It was about people like him, standing up, pushing forward, and refusing to back down. The road was endless, but Michael was no longer riding alone. In his mind, he wasn't just a biker anymore. He was part of something greater, a movement, a message, a fight for respect and equality. And no matter what came next, he would stand his ground, just as he had before. The last stretch of highway came into view. He was approaching a small town, a place that felt familiar, but different now. Everything had changed in that moment at the gas station. Michael wasn't the same person who had ridden into that town hours ago. He had faced the darkness of hatred and intimidation, and he had come out the other side stronger, more resolute. As he pulled into the town and parked his bike, He felt a sense of finality. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the turning point. He wasn't just going to ride away and let it all slip by. He had made his stand, and now he had to keep making it. A man in a black leather vest approached him, a familiar face. The burly biker from earlier. His expression had changed. The hostility was gone, replaced by something else, something softer. The words that followed surprised Michael. "You were right," the man said, his voice hesitant. "We were wrong. I don't know what came over me. I shouldn't have said what I did. I'm sorry." Michael's heart raced as he processed the words. The biker wasn't just apologizing, he was admitting his fault, recognizing the hate he had been a part of. It wasn't an easy thing to do. It wasn't an easy thing to change either. But here it was, right in front of him. The moment that could shift everything. The moment where understanding, where humanity, overcame the hate. Michael nodded slowly, a quiet understanding between them. He didn't need the apology, but he appreciated the willingness to see the truth. "I don't want your apology," Michael said, his voice calm but firm. "I want you to do better. And I want you to teach others to do the same. The road's tough, but it's not impossible. And it doesn't have to be full of hate." The biker stood still, processing the weight of Michael's words. Finally, he extended his hand. "Deal," he said. Michael took his hand, shaking it firmly. It wasn't about forgiving or forgetting. It was about change, and the willingness to stand together and build something better. The road ahead wasn't just a path of freedom anymore. It was a path of redemption and progress. And Michael, despite everything, knew that it was worth riding down. As Michael revved his bike once more and pulled out of the small town, the clouds had cleared, and the sun peeked through. The road was still long, and there would be more battles ahead. But now there was hope. Hope that change could come, one person at a time, and that the world could be better, if only they kept riding together.